as a contractor procured, and I'm also developing an open source Bitcoin payment gateway solution. It's called Straight. But the reason Yurii asked me to moderate this webinar is because out of everyone here, I guess I'm the least knowledgeable about smart contracts, yet I'm sort of curious about it. And this is why I hope I will be able to duly represent the majority of people in the Bitcoin community who are aware of the term smart contracts, but who do not yet understand what it actually means or how it works. And I hope this webinar would be a good attempt to merge various opinions and approaches about smart contracts, you know, into one digestible representation. Of course, there's already a lot of competition in the field, and I also hope we're going to have some very interesting debates. But with that said, let me quickly name our panelists and explain the rules for the rest of the attendance, and then give every panelist an introductory word to start the discussion. So we have today with us Adam Krellenstein. Krellenstein, is that Krellenstein? Is that correct? He represents Counterparty.
Yeah, Krellenstein.
Thank you, Krellenstein. Counterparty. Then we have Oleg Andreev. He's a CoreBitcoin developer, and not CoreBitcoin is a macOSX library. Then we have Pamela Morgan from Empowered Law. Then we also have Stefan Thomas from Codius and Ripple Labs, and we have Team Swanson from Great Wall of Numbers, and finally we have Yurii Rashkovskii from Trustatom. The rest of the attendants can use both the chat room for the general discussion, and there's also a Q&A section, as you can see. If you have a question to all or one of the panelists, please post it into the Q&A section. I will take a look at it and read the question to the panelists. And we also have 2 slots available for people to join the discussion, so in case you think you might have something valuable to contribute, please also post a message to the Q&A section explaining what would you like to speak about, and if it's appropriate, I will also add you to the video chat temporarily. So now let's turn to our panelists, and I'd like to ask every one of you first to introduce yourself, briefly explain what you currently are working on, and then of course tell us your take on smart contracts. What do you think they are? Why do you think they're crucial to the Bitcoin infrastructure? Or maybe why they aren't crucial? And you know, please keep it relatively short, as this is an introductory word, so I guess 2 or 3 minutes would be great. Let's start with Adam, I guess.
Okay, hi. I'm Adam Krellenstein. I'm one of the founders and developers of Counterparty, which is a Bitcoin 2.0 platform and currency for providing users with the ability to engage in peer-to-peer finance and trade instead of just peer-to-peer payments, which is what Bitcoin itself allows, really. Let's see, smart contracts. A smart contract is it's an agreement among parties that is executed by computers logically based on code as opposed to legally. It self-executes as opposed to being enforced by I don't know, the judicial branch of a government. And yeah, I mean they're incredibly important and useful. I mean the idea sort of encompasses all other ideas in the space. That said, smart contracts of course, it's a very nebulous term, and it can be used more generally than that. Even it can just mean, you know, a contract that is digitally stored, or that is parsable logically, even if it's not executed logically. And that's about it. Does that answer? Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Oleg Andreev, your word.
Hello. So I'm Russian, and I'm working on the CoreBitcoin, which is not to be confused with Bitcoin Core. And my name was chosen a year ago, way before the guys changed the Bitcoin TT name. So this is the framework for macOS 10 and iOS that implements Bitcoin protocol and related routines. And the aim is to create a native environment for executing Bitcoin and make it the best documented source for people to learn how it actually works. So my interest in smart contracts is that these are the actual contracts that actually work. So real contracts, they normally have to be enforced by some trusted third party, some authority, which actually makes them more kind of pinky promises. And what I understand about smart contracts is that this is for the first time we can have some obligations between people that are enforced by those parties that started this without anyone else involved, like true to some kind of crypto-anarchic spirit. And I'm quite interested in user experience, and I don't want just theoretical concept. I want to focus really on the user interfaces and how to build those crazy, innovative things in a approachable way that people can actually use. And this is why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg. And now Pamela Morgan. Pamela?
Hi, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to be part of this panel. I think I'm the only lawyer on the panel, which puts me in an interesting position. I have a law firm, Empowered Law, and outside of the Bitcoin crypto space, I advise a lot of different companies, primarily startups, but I help people with corporate governance issues and compliance issues, all sorts of different things. I really enjoy working with startups, and that's primarily my focus. In the Bitcoin space, I work with a number of different companies to implement multi-signature solutions, and again, looking at good corporate governance. I also work with individuals for estate planning, so if you have Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, that should be part of your estate plan, and so I work with individuals in that way. And I also help to educate other lawyers in how to deal with cryptocurrency. I'm really interested in smart contracts because I think that this has the potential to change the judicial system and the way that we participate, particularly in commercial transactions throughout the world. And I'm really excited about how we can use smart contracts to supplement the current judicial process and occasionally avoid it if possible. And so I'm here to discuss ways that we can ensure that smart contracts fall within the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, for example, arbitration, so that they won't be reviewed by judicial process. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Pamela. Next one is Stefan Tual from Ethereum. Is that correct?
That's correct. Hi, I'm Stefan. I'm the CCO for Ethereum. And Ethereum is a platform that aims to decentralize the web. So what we mean by that is applications with no middleman and no central authority to arbitrate between parties, so purely peer-to-peer type of platform. Smart contracts in the context of Ethereum are sort of the building blocks of our applications. They're little pieces of code that live on this blockchain technology that your audience probably has heard about. And they can be programmed in any way, shape, or form you'd like them to take. It's purely a programming language. What's interesting about smart contract, I think, is anyone who tried to maybe cancel a cable TV subscription or get out of their gym contract will quickly realize that it's not all as it seems. Smart contracts provide an environment in which it is possible for users to understand what they're getting into and what the rules of that contract are, potentially even in very easily readable human-type language.
Thank you, Stefan. And next one is Team Swanson from Great Wallet Numbers.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for organizing this, by the way. So yeah, I'm here because you guys needed another white guy from Europe or something like that. It's a joke. So the definition I have of smart contracts, I've written a couple books in this space, and the definition I use is a smart contract is a proposed tool to automate human interactions. It's a computer protocol, an algorithm that can self-execute, self-enforce, self-verify, and self-constrain the performance of a contract. I think I got most of that definition from Nick Szabo's work. For those of you who are unfamiliar with him, just look up some of his past writings. I think the primary work he's known for is a paper called Formalizing and Securing Relationships on Public Networks. and he's basically what we consider the grandfather of this space. So yeah, I'm here just to provide education and maybe some trolling.
Thank you, team. And Yurii?
Hi, my name is Yurii. I'm the co-founder at Trustatom. Basically, it's a one-stop shop for practical smart contracts. My personal understanding of smart contracts is that it's essentially a program or a protocol that either automates the enforcement of a certain agreement or essentially obviates the need for such an agreement. So basically, it's something that removes the need for humans to enforce certain agreements and find resolution within that. So that's probably very close to Wikipedia's definition of smart contracts. But let's see where we get through this conversation and how we will understand them after that.
Thanks, Yurii, and I think we also have Stefan Thomas from Ripple Labs, but I'm not sure he can actually say so. Oh yeah, here we go. Stefan, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also about what do you think about smart contracts in general? 2-3 minutes.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, my name is Stefan Thomas. I've been a Bitcoin contributor since 2010, and more recently I've been working with the Ripple Labs team on the Ripple network. And like I think most blockchain-based systems, we've quickly discovered that blockchains need a lot of expressive power in terms of providing more rules and more business logic around what happens to the assets that are tracked in a blockchain. So we very quickly started working on a smart contract system. And as we were working on that, we noticed that there was a need to have a system that can not just interact with one particular blockchain, but can interact with all the different blockchains out there, can bridge assets between them, and can also interact with systems that are not blockchains, like, for example, an HTTP API or PayPal or what have you. And so that's how we created a new project, or we came to create a new project called Codius, and I think that's probably what I'm going to be talking about mostly today.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. So now let's get to the most interesting part and talk about the current state of affairs. And first, maybe then we can move on to the things that are being developed right now, and then talk about the future prospects for smart contracts. So let me address this first question to all of you. What do you think is wrong with the current system of legal contracts? What should be fixed, and what, in your opinion, actually works pretty great? And also, maybe you can give us some examples of existing technologies that are just so we all have a starting point. Maybe Pamela would start with that because she runs a law firm.
Sure, I'll be happy to address that. So I think the default answer for most people is the entire system is broken. But I would encourage you to spend some time kind of parsing that out, really. If you look at the system in the U.S., there are certainly delays, there are certainly costs. However, many people appreciate the opportunity to have their disputes heard by a jury of their peers. And that's an important concept that we shouldn't necessarily throw away. So I think that as we look towards alternative dispute resolution, particularly when we're looking at how we can integrate blockchain technology or Bitcoin technology, we can consider some sort of jury system, some sort of evidentiary system. I think the things that work are finality. So once you go through the appellate process, you can't continue to litigate on and on and on. Now, some will say that the process takes a very long time, and if you go to the U.S. Supreme Court, we know that it can take 10+ years and millions of dollars. Most disputes don't make it that far. In fact, most disputes are settled by mediation and negotiation between the parties. So to avail yourself of the legal process is a costly and timely endeavor. And so I think that what works with the current system, again, is the finality, is the opportunity to have a jury of your peers hear your dispute and decide it, rather than centralizing power in one person. And I think those things can naturally translate to what we're doing outside of the traditional sphere, particularly if we're able to craft an alternative dispute resolution mechanism that is similar to arbitration and final, so that courts will not go back and review the decisions that are made by our alternative systems. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Let's hear what others think about it. Anyone?
I think Pamela is right when she says that it could potentially bring efficiencies into the sort of the existing legal framework as we understand it. I think the vast majority of transactions that we actually do with with other third parties can be software contracts. You do not need to rely on the existing legal system. It will be too expensive. The vast majority of stuff we do, including escrow when we buy something on eBay, or even the issuing of currency, can be represented as a contract in the Ricardian sense. With regards to that, it also brings transparency and clarity to the end users. So it's about empowering people again.
Okay. Adam? No thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the hard part is making any smart contract system compatible or interact with the current legal system. The reason we have judges and juries is because is that a lot of interpretation is required to see whether or not the conditions of any contract have been fulfilled. And in some cases, those conditions can be made more precise. For instance, if the condition is that a payment is made to a party, by such and such a date, if that condition is encoded in a smart contract and precise insofar as it says, for instance, this Bitcoin is transferred, this much Bitcoin is transferred to this address, there's much less ambiguity than if you're dealing with things like like reversible payments or debt or other contracts of the traditional financial world. That said, all sorts of conditions that are external to any distributed consensus mechanism, such as the Bitcoin blockchain, are going to be very hard to encode in it. If the conditions of the contract are payment, then the way forward is obvious. If they are, I don't know, something as simple as labor performed, that's much harder to encode in any smart contract, and so it's unclear how a smart contract could replace the current legal system with regard to conditions such as that. Moreover, insofar as I don't know how smart contracts are going to replace the current legal system or interact with it insofar as smart contracts are going to be, I presume, a subject of legal dispute because for any reasons the smart contract was misleading, the smart contract didn't work properly, so on, right? And for the foreseeable future, the legal systems which we have now, such as exist now, will trump the smart contract system, and what should be irreversible, what should be final, won't be. And so that unless the smart contract system gains a reputation and a respect and value that are on par with the current legal system, at least in some realms, I don't see what I don't see the way forward.
I know Oleg has probably a different opinion about that. What does he think?
Well, that's a great point about the system that should be final and irreversible. So I will answer like two questions, right? So first of all, what's the current state of affairs with the smart contracts, and the second, what's wrong with it, what's missing. So the current state of affairs is that for any kind of contractual system, we need an agreement system. And so far, the biggest and actually working and proven agreement system is Bitcoin. So we have it. So it's the current state of affairs. We have some kind of an agreement network which is enforced which is monetized enough to be practical for many useful contracts. Like it's more than $6 billion right now. And it's irreversible. It's really hardcore. We have like plenty of hash rate, a lot of Chinese miners are doing their work properly, a lot of nodes on the network exist. It's currently working. And it already uses some very useful capabilities for enforcing smart contracts, like multi-sig, for instance. So we can use it, sort of. So the second part is what's missing, right? So to use it, you need the user interface. You have the network, you have the scripts, you have the knowledge, we all know exactly how to do things there. What we lack is the tools and some user interface to let people use it with full understanding and actually achieving something there. So, for instance, Yurii, as far as I know, is working on solving this problem. Like, we have this consensus network, let's create some user interface for putting this stuff on. I myself work on a Bitcoin wallet, and I'm coming from some other side. Like, if there are guys like Yurii or Adam or whoever who creates some kind of application that creates those fancy transactions, how do people will participate in them with their own Bitcoins? So as a wallet developer, I'm interested in some universal way to put my coins in arbitrary contracts. And so we can have all three pieces together: the agreement network, the smart contract applications or services, and people's accounts where they store the money, how they put this money into the contracts. So we have those two missing pieces, the services and the wallets that will be able to participate in the services. That's my answer.
All right, Tim, what's your opinion about that?
Hey, yeah. So actually, I think I see eye to eye with Adam here. Basically, the idea of how we have a system that's open to interpretation. You do have reversibility. You do have nebulousness. These are things that Nick Szabo actually discussed in an article of his called "Wet and Dry Code" back in 2008. And if you look back at some of the earlier works of these cypherpunks back in the 90s, they talked about some of these core issues that Oleg talked about in terms of being able to mitigate these trusted parties. In fact, if you look at the Bitcoin white paper alone, the first section has the word reversibility around 5 times, and the word trust or trusted appears 11 times in the body of the work. So this was something that whoever created Bitcoin or whatever was really interested trying to mitigate the need for any kind of centralized or third party involved in the process of transactions to reduce mediation costs and so forth. But I would suppose my biggest criticism in this space, it's not pointed to anyone here in particular, is how we have a lot of cryptocurrency cosplay, basically, like Mary Sue Bitcoin. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with who Mary Sue is. She's an archetype who basically is this idealized type of superhero in a sense. And so what happened with Bitcoin and smart contracts is you had this golden age where you had the limited ideas of what it could do. Like Superman, for example, when he first came out, he could only jump over a building. And later he was pushed to be able to fly because it looks better in a cartoon. You only have a limited amount of space and it takes too long to jump across the map. So that's kind of what I see with Bitcoin and smart contracts. And we could talk about that a little bit later, but just how they've evolved to encompass all these attributes that they're probably not particularly good at. Not because of lack of trying, but just because of the mechanisms of how they work in terms of incentives for running mining equipment and so on. So again, we can talk about that a little bit later, but I think Adam and Oleg have really mentioned a few of the things that are pretty important at this point.
All right.
I think it should be emphasized that yeah, Bitcoin can do smart contracts. It has a scripting system, no less. The question is what smart contracts it's capable of executing, and Counterparty adds a whole set, and Ethereum will add a whole set, and there's a difference between being able to execute smart contracts and being able to execute arbitrary smart contracts or smart contracts in a particular form with a particular set of data, Codius, for instance, will be able to have source information that are external to the blockchain itself, and so on.
All right, Yurii, can you actually counter that argument about the golden age? I know you probably would not completely agree with that. So
I don't think I either agree or oppose it. Just the way I'm trying to look at smart contracts these days. I think there's a lot of emphasis on trying to sort of connect the legal system and smart contracts because of the word contract, I presume. And the more I've been thinking and just trying to build something in this particular space, my personal realization is that the majority of people, and I'm talking primarily about people outside of the cryptocurrencies community, they don't necessarily see a pressing problem in their sort of legal environments. They're sort of used to it. Yes, there are problems, but this is not something they are immediately thinking of replacing. Yet when you talk about commerce and you can explain how you can improve and essentially make some things cheaper, basically some kind of arbitration and escrows and all these kind of operations, how can you, for example, trade with somebody in a very remote country without actually having to trust them? All these kind of things they do make a lot more sense to sort of regular people outside of the cryptocurrencies community. So the perspective that I've been thinking about was mostly about how not to sort of complement the legal system right now, but how just to put this technology available for commerce and basically put it on those rails so that people can see actual benefits from basically money saving benefits from this kind of self-executing programs or protocols. And then it might lead to actual sort of maybe not specifically legally enforceable contracts, but something that is closer to that and much wider acceptance of that. But I'm pretty sure somebody else can also counter my arguments about whether people need or don't need non-commercial contracts as well. But I guess just like Bitcoin was pretty much all about commerce in the beginning. So it's about being able to send money from A to B and do some more complicated things. The initial focus should be on basically those who are engaged in different business activities and how can they immediately benefit from that.
All right, thank you, Yurii.
I'm going to jump in really quickly because I think there are a couple points that we really need to consider as we're looking at this discussion. One is that there's a common misconception that somehow smart contracts are outside of the realm of judicial reach, and that is absolutely incorrect. Courts will hear a dispute, and unfortunately, if any of you have been subject to a summons, you know that you can't control whether or not someone files a lawsuit against you. So anyone can go to court and file a lawsuit against you. And then the question becomes whether or not the court has jurisdiction and whether or not the court is going to decide that dispute. So just because we craft smart contracts and say, well, they're not really contracts and they're they're self-executing and the outcomes are irreversible, that's not necessarily true. A judge may decide to look at that contract and say the smart contract will be viewed from judicial eyes in the same way as a written contract will be. And so if there are missing clauses, the judge has the opportunity to supplement those missing clauses, at least in the United States, with generally accepted business practices in whatever industry you're in. And so by neglecting to consider smart contracts in the context of a legal environment, you're actually opening people up to more risk because there's no way to tell what laws are going to apply. Is there an arbitration clause? Is there a choice of law clause? Will you be requested to appear in court outside of your country? And what are the rules that will govern a dispute when this arises? A lot of times we look at contracts and say, okay, the contract defines the terms of performance between the two parties. But if that's all contracts actually did, contracts would be much shorter. the reason that they are so long in most cases is because they're trying to deal with the ambiguities of real life, and they're trying to anticipate situations that might come up. And so we can't code out all of those ambiguities. One of the things we can do simply and easily is include a choice of law clause, an arbitration clause, something like that. And hopefully, if this smart contract is brought into court, the judge will honor that. Additionally, I think that we should use, or at least consider, some of the language that that has been really proven in courts around the world for a long time. Let me give you an example. Something like negligence or intent. This is one word, but it has a vast wealth of meaning behind it. And so if you look at incorporating those words and that language into smart contracts, it's almost like incorporating a macro. So it says, you know, hey, include all of these things when you say negligence, or all of these things when you say intent. And this can be a benefit to smart contracts because it can help to make it more readable, more understandable, and it can also help to reduce risk when we're faced with the inevitable reality of ending up within the current judicial process.
Actually, I have an additional question to you, Pamela, because when you mentioned, when you talked about jurisdiction and which country, which court in which country will look at your case, essentially I thought about international trade, and this might be a use case of smart contracts because it's, you know, it actually is difficult to enforce certain laws in international trade because everybody knows you're going to go, if your partner is going to take you to that court in that country, you can do the same for your country, and you know nothing's going to work. So everybody's essentially incentivized to cooperate and negotiate rather than go to courts.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I would like to supplement what Pamela said. Actually, it's a great point that any contract could be subject to judicial process, and that's correct. And when we make some simpler contract and try to avoid judicial process, we are not protecting each other from the process in the future. So what's important to consider is that the whole point of smart contracts is to probably save on the costs associated with the regular contracts. So what you say of these lengthy ambiguity resolving contracts that exist in the judicial realm, they all bear the cost, right? So we have to read them, we have to understand them, we have to pay the attorneys and lawyers to figure out all the little nitty-gritty details. And this is the reality, right? So if for some reason or in some setting, some people actually want to cut those costs, for instance, they are anonymous traders or they're international traders or they really just trade something really cheap and they just don't have a budget for covering all those cases at all just to start with, but they still have to do the business, right? Then come smart contracts because they allow them to specify only the terms they care about and enforce in some way that they will be the arbitrators, or they will be able to choose ultimate arbitrators for their future disputes. And the precondition here is that they sort of feel themselves protected enough from judicial, from using the judicial system by another party, either because they're anonymous or because it's just too expensive for either party to start the legal battle over the whatever thing they're trading. And this is quite normal in regular business. Regular businesses, even within a single country, they tend to avoid using the judicial system as much as possible because it's just too expensive. A couple of small businesses, they try to do the upfront payments, they try to put money in escrow, do all the practical things just to make sure that they would never have to even start doing any kind of dispute resolution in the legal framework. So I just look at this as a way to solve the cost. It's absolutely nothing wrong with people trying to simplify things, making contracts shorter. Maybe they will be ambiguous, but if they have mechanisms to arbitrate them themselves, for instance, if we bought lock money with some fancy Nash equilibrium kind of transaction, then we both are interested in arbitrating this ourselves and resolving all the ambiguities ourselves. And then people can protect their kind of anonymity or live in different countries, so they sort of less exposed to the complexity and costs of the legal framework.
I saw Stefan Thomas sort of nodding when Pamela was talking, looking really concerned when Oleg was talking. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, so I agree with what Pamela and Oleg has been saying in terms of we can't replace the legal system and you know, the human interaction that deals with ambiguity. So I think that where smart contracts can come in is in resolving some of those issues that don't have a lot of ambiguity. Like, for example, if I sell you something and it's clear for me to prove that I have actually provided the goods, and some smart contract can verify that, then, you know, you transferring the money back to me, that's something that smart contract can manage. I think one way of looking at this is that we are already using smart contracts every day. Every time you log into Amazon, every time you log into eBay, and you're interacting with that website, there is a contract of sorts. The only thing that's odd about it is that the code is run by one of the parties that is party to the contract. And I think that's what we're trying to address. It's trying to run the contract on a neutral platform as opposed to having one of the parties who's very invested in the outcome be the actual, you know, executors of the rules.
All right, so well, let me address the next question to Stefan Tual, because he's from Ethereum. I think it sort of relates to that very much. What are the current practices and use cases of smart contracts? Some people must be using something similar to that, and this is why you are building Ethereum. Like, who uses smart contracts today? What for? Or is there really a market for them, or is it not discovered yet, and you know, the demand for such things has to be developed?
Well, it's quite interesting because your initial question was, you know, is it going to replace or supplement the existing legal system? In the case of our platform, Ethereum is not here to propel or to dismantle existing systems. It's a third way for people to go and build a set of rules by which they interact with community peer-to-peer, and as the gentleman that was talking before me, where one of the parties is not directly benefiting from potentially modifying the terms of the contract, so the so-called pork boiling issue, to their own advantage at some point. In terms of practical usage, well, you know, the sky's the limit. Again, contracts are used every day of our life, even social contracts. I think one environment I'm quite interested in is this concept of using reputation that you build by interacting with decentralized services, such as a decentralized eBay, for example, or a decentralized Kickstarter. Build up your pseudonymous or even real identity if you choose to reveal that information, and then use that reputation as a collateral, because now that reputation has value to you. Use that as a collateral for, you know, microfinance or microinsurance, that type of stuff. I find that absolutely fascinating because, again, yes, there are no arbitrators on the blockchain, so to speak, and that's the whole point to a certain extent. But if the contract is collateralized on both sides, it could be by reputation or it could be by financial means. Either it's Ether in our case, or it could even be Bitcoin in our case as well, since we could interact with their chain. You have these self-executed programs that allow you to, well, not having to pay, you know, thousands upon thousands of dollars, if not millions, to lawyers. And so when people say, well, contracts are ambiguous and that's a good thing, I think it's a good thing for lawyers, not for users.
All right, so Yurii, you're also building something for processing smart contracts. You probably looked at the market. Who uses smart contracts? Why? Why would people use them?
I think, well, you know, if you're talking about blockchain kind of smart contracts, I think the most widely used smart contract is essentially, well, Bitcoin. You know, people engage in the very simple contract, I sign you money. And, you know, basically that thing, the contract, it's a very simple contract. I don't think there's much of an actual use for, you know, of smart contracts in the real world yet. There are some instances here and there of different things like proof of possession and multisig, which is another form of a contract, so to speak, and related things. But on a grand scale of things, and by grant in this case I mean just cryptocurrencies. It's those simple money travels from Alice to Bob kind of contracts, and it's up to us, I guess, to figure out what are the next cases where the immediate value is, and what can we offer to people that has a value to them right now.
Okay, team, a little bit of cynicism from you.
The token cynic, huh? So actually, before I say anything further, I just want to mention for the audience some other projects that you might be interested in looking at. BitHalo, Notary Chains is a new project. It encompasses some of these ideas of proof of existence created by Manuel Arroz. He's the one who did the POE, but Notary Chains is a new project. I think it sits on top of Mastercoin. And the issue that people should consider is proof of existence, proof of signature. These are just really high-tech forms of certification. So whether or not they're smart contracts, I guess, is a matter of debate. There's another project, Pebble, Hyperledger, Tezos, Tendermint, Nibblecoin, Ethereum, which I guess their project's called Eris, which apparently is the first DAO ever. DAO, for the audience, is a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a thing, apparently. SKU Chain is a startup in Palo Alto. I talk about them in Chapter 16. They have this interesting idea of what we call a purchase chain, which is a real use case for kind of updating the process from getting a letter of credit to a bill of lading, and trying to cut out the time and mediation costs in that process. And there's a few others in stealth mode. So I really don't have a whole lot to add with cynicism at this point. We could go on and come back to me in a little bit.
Okay, Adam, let's talk about Counterparty, because I know a lot of people started using it. I myself started working on it and issuing assets. What about your customers and people who issue assets? Do they need something like that, and why?
Sorry?
Yeah, I was saying your customers, people who issue assets on Counterparty. Do they need something like smart contracts, and why? Or maybe this is like, can you talk about it a little bit? In this case right now.
As Yurii said, Bitcoin is a platform for smart contracts, albeit limited in some ways, and as I said before, Counterparty extends the smart contract platform of Bitcoin beyond what it's previously capable of, to include things like trustless trade, asset creation, dividends, betting, derivatives, and so on. So everyone who uses Counterparty is using just the tip of the iceberg in terms of smart contracts on a blockchain, and like we have lots and lots of stuff planned for the development of a more powerful and fully fleshed out smart contract platform. It really is an all encompassing term, which we hope to which we are working on realizing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Pamela, what do you think? Do you have any current customers who you think would benefit from it? And that's actually another question I wanted to address to everybody. But let's hear first from Pamela, because she actually deals with people who might need that. So, what kind of businesses do you think can immediately today benefit from something like smart contracts?
Well, in my world, I think almost every business can benefit from smart contracts. I do want to address one thing quickly. The idea that, certainly I don't speak for all lawyers, but the idea that ambiguities benefit lawyers, I think is a kind of a misnomer. At least the lawyers that I work with, we don't want to see our clients go to litigation. That is not a successful contract negotiation. And ideally, what I see is using smart contracts as a tool to help my clients understand the terms prior to execution. Because a lot of times, clients will say things like, yeah, you just work out all the details, these are the 5 things I care about, and make sure that I'm not going to get sued. And they don't care about all the little intricacies, where when we switch to an execution mode like a smart contract, they will care because the outcome will happen regardless of whether or not they want it to. And so they will be incentivized to care about what's in the contract prior to execution. So I think that's great. I'm not a fan of 20-page long contracts with a bunch of legalese that no one knows what it means. To go back to use cases, you know, I'm using things like proof of existence now to document wills and other sorts of contracts. I'm using multi-signature for a lot of, like I said, corporate governance. So I'm helping startups create and use multi-signature accounts to ensure that, for example, they don't have a single signer Bitcoin account that can, you know, either be lost or stolen or hacked or whatever. It also gives more transparency to investors, et cetera, et cetera. So right now, I don't know if people would consider multi-signature addresses, you know, working into the smart contract realm. I think it is. I think that right now, anyone who's working, you know, I don't remember who said that earlier, but it was basically, you know, we're already doing smart contracts with Amazon, with Netflix, with all these, you know, other sorts of companies where, you know, we're signing contracts. And there are terms and conditions. I mean, there are terms and conditions on all of these websites. So these are contracts. But I really love the idea of shifting the power to a negotiated power sharing situation rather than, you know, he who has the power makes the rules. So I don't know if that answers your question as far as use, but that's where, you know, my clients are now. I have a number of clients that are interested in working on developing smart contract solutions, but I can't talk about them right now.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Stefan, Thomas, what do you think? What are the use cases? Benny, yeah, I don't think we can hear you because you have not turned your microphone on, so that will be helpful. Yeah, so use cases and essentially, like, what businesses do you think would benefit from that today?
Right. So I think some of the use cases that are interesting immediately are not necessarily the ones that you would associate with, you know, the more fancy terms that we're talking about, like, you know, replacing the legal system or anything like that, but rather just the very basic things around how do we secure our bitcoins, how do we provide things like a secure vault that you can spend from up to a certain daily limit. How do we represent you know, ongoing business relationships? Like, I subscribe to a website, I want them to withdraw money from my Bitcoin address, that kind of stuff. And right now, a lot of that kind of thing we do through we can only do through centralized services like Coinbase. It's the only widely used Bitcoin subscription API right now, and it'd be nice to have you know, just a general system that can encode someone's wallet and has modular extensibility in terms of, you know, we can pull out money, we can put an authorization hold, like you go to a hotel, you give them your Bitcoin card, and they put a hold on your account with your consent for any incidentals, that kind of stuff, things that payment systems need. Another thing that I think we'll see sort of in the short term is bridging. You know, we have a total proliferation of ledgers right now. There's so many blockchains coming out, and it'd be nice to be able to trade between them in a you know, decentralized and trustless fashion. So I think that's another important early use case.
So I know Oleg, because he lives in Paris and he likes to, you know, walk around and convince small businesses to accept Bitcoin. He probably has a couple of use cases in mind and you know, a couple of ideas of how smart contracts would apply to small businesses. So what do you think?
Okay, so the very first idea is for those people who don't have much reputation, don't have much power, and still want to make business with each other. So two basic use cases are when just two people want to sell something like eBay style. For instance, I'm selling my iPod and I'm here in France and you're in the United States. I don't know you, you don't know me. We're never frequent traders on eBay, so we don't have any reputation. But suddenly I have something you want and we want to have some safe way to sell it, right? So right now it's pretty expensive and sometimes it's even impossible, right? What smart contracts allow us is to put a collateral for this iPod like twice in a single transaction that we can unlock, both of us, that we can unlock after the deal is done. So for instance, the iPod costs $100. I put $200, you put $200 on a single 2 out of 2 multi-sig output, and then I send the iPod to you, and you send money later when you receive it. We resolve all the disputes, like partial refund or full refund or whatever if something goes wrong. And then when both of us are happy, we just unlock the money back to our wallets. The important point here is that we started with absolute zero trust between each other, and we buy this trust by putting something more valuable in the deposit box than the stuff that we are trading. So the iPod costs just $100, but we both risk much more than that. So we are more interested in resolving this issue to mutual satisfaction. So this is one approach. Of course, not many people will feel comfortable with this. It's okay, but some people, and from my experience, I know some people who would be glad to try this out. And for small amounts of money or for small amounts of value being transferred, it could be quite acceptable. So second use case, what's similar, is for all sorts of like freelance or small businesses interaction when they actually never have any like spare money to pay the lawyers or to negotiate some complex legal contracts, etc. Or they want to hire some guy also sitting in some Bangladesh or Russia or whatever to do some stuff for them. In this case, they can, in a similar fashion, lock up money and just do the deal. What's beautiful about this scheme is that they don't need to figure out all the details up front. They don't need to be super specific. They can always be flexible and renegotiate down the road and find some agreement between each other because they're in this Nash equilibrium game theory situation. This is why it's so cool. So they just put some money. This way they buy trust. They don't need any reputation. They figure out things down the road. And this is, I think, is one of the most important smart contracts. It doesn't rely on any third party. It's not like Stefan mentioned, like Amazon or eBay are sort of smart contracts. Well, I don't myself consider them that important cases because they actually require the single trusted authority. The most important case is when we don't have any trusted authority whatsoever, when we really have nothing to start with. And yeah, maybe a bit later I'd like to talk a little bit about Wallet API to address the concern about how people could participate in those contracts, but probably it's enough for me talking right now.
All right, so essentially the scheme that you were describing sounds like a collateral. So I know that Yurii as well, you know, we talked about it, and essentially he's trying to implement sort of the same thing. And probably the Ethereum guys are also working on that. So I would like to give first word to Yurii and then to Stefan. And can you highlight the differences with that kind of smart contract when you put the collateral differences in your implementation of that contract, if you might? Yeah, Yurii.
Yeah, sure. Well, I personally find there's one of those simple yet possible contracts that we can do today. It is, like I said, either an escrow or a collateral kind of contract. And I see in the chat some people say that it probably doesn't always work, which is right. Not a, there's not a single contract that covers everything and every kind of possibility, but it's a very simple approach to resolve a particular type of trades or type of operations where people lock in that higher value. I think Oleg actually described it pretty well. I mean, the idea is really simple, that it's a 2 out of 2 multi-sig transaction. So unless both parties agree, there's absolutely no way to release the funds that were put into this deposit box. And I think this is one of those things amongst others that should be tried as those further ideas how to promote smart contracts for a more general population, let's say even within the cryptocurrencies community. So, for example, there were a lot of approaches to solve how do we solve the trust issue when we are trading remotely, the OTC ratings and whatnot. And again, we will not solve everything. Obviously, it will not work for contracts of really high value where you absolutely cannot come up with a deposit that is even equal to that of the transaction value. But for something where it's manageable, it certainly works.
So I think everybody would agree that this collateral type of scheme sounds like, you know, the most general and basic and simple to understand types of contracts for, you know, general population. And I wonder, you know, what is the Ethereum take on that? How is it going to work in Ethereum if it's going to work?
So yeah, I'm a little bit confused by your question. So first of all, Ethereum is not a set of features. So we have absolutely zero feature. It's a programming language. So how is it going to work? The community will build applications. We provide HTML interfaces that are also decentralized via a BitTorrent-like network. They talk to the underlying Ethereum blockchain using JavaScript. Again, a language that's fairly common in the web development world, so it should be easy for people to either adapt their existing application or create a brand new one. And then the reason they use Ethereum really is to leverage this generalized, decentralized consensus at scale, whereby when we mean something is trustless, we mean that you do not need to put trust into the fact that the code will do what it says it will do. It just will. And again, that's why, you know, Bitcoin is secure. It's based on the same principle of decentralized consensus at scale via implementation via a blockchain. So in terms of, you know, what's possible and what type of escrow will be available and does it have multisig and all this, the answer is yes to everything. Since it's a programming language. It's Turing complete. You write the multisig you'd like to see, 20 parties out of 10, or sorry, 10 out of 20 parties, or any escrow you'd like. You can even build your own decentralized organization where the governance and the rules of the organization, how the funds are distributed, who controls what happens if somebody leaves, and that kind of stuff is all in code. And that allows, obviously, in my view, the most interesting advantage here is transparency. The fact that people, when they're looking for a job today, they don't probably ask the right questions when they're in an interview because they're scared of not getting the job. If the employers, the DAOs in this case, have all their rules and governance explained transparently, at least they know what they're getting into.
So I think people usually are confused with Ethereum when they think, okay, we have smart contracts, and I know that you know, Ethereum is a programming language essentially that would allow me to do this and that. But how is it different? Why can't we do that on the Bitcoin blockchain? Could you explain that? I think that is the biggest confusion that people have. Why can't the same thing be implemented on the Bitcoin blockchain? The same thing that Ethereum tries to achieve.
So I mean, the way we look at it, and once again, I think it's a problem of language. It's actually quite interesting that initially we're starting to, during this conversation, we're starting to see that when we mean contract, we could talk about, for example, buying something on Amazon or anything else, paying for your bill at the restaurant or whatever. What we call contract within Ethereum, they're basically closures for the people who are technical in the audience. They're basically pieces of code. We call them contracts because it was a name that we felt was appropriate for this. But Ethereum is not built to, again, decentralize the legal system in particular. It's built to decentralize anything. Why can't it be done on Bitcoin? Well, I mean, like some people have said quite accurately, some of it can already be done on Bitcoin. In fact, Ethereum, through its Ether cell, is currently the largest holder of Bitcoin in a single multisig. So yes, you can use Bitcoin for this type of transactions and so on and so forth. What we're bringing is a generalist programming language. In fact, 3 of them, even potentially more, assuming we get new compilers in the GitHub, where we trivialize the building of these applications. I remember last year I was watching Mike Hearn at the Turing Turing Festival in Vienna, and he was talking about what we call DAOs, pretty much, and I was fascinated by it. I thought, oh, I'll go and build one. And then I had to learn things like UTXOs and God knows what else. It's incredibly complex. It's not an easy technology to get in my view. What we provide is not only the underlying blockchain, the programming language to program the programs that are in that blockchain, as well as the interfaces and the IDE and etc. to build the GUIs, the very important GUIs. Again, it needs to be easy for people to go and use these applications. It can't be about developers only. It needs for end users to be able to build those applications, maybe even a drag and drop type interface.
So Team is a person who is uninvolved with both Ethereum and Trustatom and Counterparty. Can you help us understand it better? What are the deficiencies of each and every project mentioned. What do you think about it?
Go-to deficiency guy, huh? So I would say, okay, they're not really saying anything particularly controversial. These things are fundamentally, at least from an engineering perspective, could be done. The problem, though, I think runs into kind of what Richard Bowes discussed in, if listeners are interested, he went to Kenya, and he did a podcast a few weeks ago on Let's Talk Bitcoin, number 133. I really recommend people listen to it. In it, he basically talks about all of these real-world issues that run into this idealized system that the developers are building, and as a result, he ended up seeing all these adoption hurdles, whether it was education or, for example, tablets. People were taking these tablets with Bitcoin, and they could simply just resell it on a market. This is the tablet itself for more than they make like in a year, basically. It's just significantly more money. And I guess he talked about a few issues about like P2P giving and lending and charity, and how that doesn't probably work like we think it does. But I guess the biggest issue I think that's facing this space, and people want issues, is just a cost-benefit analysis of running these systems. Like, there's a cost somewhere to run this stuff on many different servers. Now, there's different ways to come up with consensus for this. Like, for example, Ripple, Stellar, Hyperledger, they're all using consensus ledgers, which require a lot less capital expenditures. But when you end up building something that requires some kind of mining process itself, that costs money. So I think fundamentally, in the long run, it won't be so much what it can do, it's what can it economically do. So when you hear this mantra of, oh, let's decentralize everything, sure, that's fine and dandy, but that's kind of like solutionism. It's like a solution looking for a problem, because that, decentralize my hair, proof of follicle. Like, there's a certain reductio ad absurdum which you come to with decentralization. Now, do you want to actually make something that people are actually going to use in a way that's cheaper than an existing system, or are we just going to make it and just throw it out there and think that they're going to use it because we designed it that way? So I think, yeah, education I think is going to be an issue, and there are some people pushing that right now, and they're doing a good job. I know. Primavera de Filippi, she's over at Harvard's Berkman Center. She's got something called the Common Accord program. And then also Mike Hearn, listeners, if you're interested, he's made about 7 or 8 use cases using the existing Bitcoin blockchain, including assurance contracts, not insurance contracts, assurance contracts. And he's got a program called Lighthouse, which hopes to build this kind of solder it onto the actual chain itself. So there's some things to keep in mind. I'm sure I'll get yelled at in a minute here.
I want to just make a quick correction to something that Stefan said. The reason that Bitcoin can't do smart contracts the way that Ethereum can is because contracts in Bitcoin don't have state.
Now we hear the buzzing.
Sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay, yeah. Contracts in Ethereum don't have state, or in Bitcoin don't have state. Contracts in Ethereum do have state. Contracts in Ethereum can also call other contracts. They can have associated with them both funds and arbitrary data, and that's what makes it different from Bitcoin.
Tim, I was also looking at the Q&A section, and there's one person who's saying, Tim mentioned quite a few projects. Is there a place where I could access the list? So I think you should maybe write something in the chat room and mention those projects, because people are obviously interested. Let's now talk about the future of smart contracts, and what do you believe are the new use cases? Because we talked a lot about the existing use cases and how we can incorporate them, but what do you think would be the new use cases for people to think about that they cannot even right now imagine? And I think let's ask Oleg first.
Well, okay, all those new use cases are wonderful because somebody will invent them and tell us. This would be awesome. So one thing I can imagine is some automated services that pay each other automatically. So you can have some instances like automated agents, like Mike Hearn said once. that you put some money in and they just execute code, provide some services, and pay for their resources, and you don't have to worry about this. So you don't need to have like rate limiting, some subscriptions for the API usage. You just can anonymously plug into some computer on the network, use the services they provide, and pay them back. And this could be facilitated by some sort of smart contracts when just two robots, two pieces of code recognize some common conditions, agree to them, and begin adhering to those conditions. And one of my most favorite examples of this kind of invention that I'm eager to find being implemented by someone is the global decentralized clearing mesh network that would allow like Ripple-like exchange of IOUs, but without Ripple, without special coins, just purely based on Bitcoin and the smart contract style collateral. So computers can just exchange some IOUs, clear the debts frequently in Bitcoins, and you can pay for a coffee in Starbucks and everything would scale and nobody will ever complain that Bitcoin doesn't scale. So this is one of the future use cases for the smart contracts.
All right, we've got some music now. Adam, what do you think?
That was an accident.
No. I was going to ask you because you obviously came up with this interesting counterparty solution, which is obviously, right now it's kind of a new thing in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So, what do you think would be the future use cases of smart contracts? Can you come up with something?
There are too many. There are too many. It's
Tell us your favorite one. Yeah, I think we lost Adam. No?
Yeah.
You there?
Decent. I guess it would have to do with like at the networking level, right? So the sort of things that storage is doing, it's where the contract actually recursively affects how the contracts are transmitted and how internet access is provided, distributed, data storage, distributed internet access, and where, or take a simple example, something like Tor, right? Imagine Tor where Tor nodes, Tor exit nodes, and regular Tor nodes are paid for the bandwidth that they provide, for having low latency, and for having high security properties. That's something I think they could really change the world. Right now, the internet itself is not as decentralized as Bitcoin that lives on it, and it could be. And if it did, it would be. It could really truly realize people's vision of an open network on which anyone can communicate, not only without barriers to entry, without middlemen, without censorship, but also as cheaply, easily, and as quickly as possible.
So, Yurii, what do you think? What are the future use cases? Because I know you thought about some of them, and what are those? Well, what do you think people don't understand right now that they will use in the future?
Great question. Personally, I still find it really hard to think about the future ones because, well, we're still trying to establish today's use cases. But the ones that actually come up to my mind recently as those that can exist in the future are those that are actually mitigating some of the, let's say, deficiencies or things that we wouldn't like about existing contracts in different ways. So, for example, ensuring the other contracts might be an interesting thing. So, for example, yes, we might have this joint escrow or mutual collateral kind of thing where we lock up the money in order to incentivize each other to act honestly and get the money back. But at the same time, wouldn't you want to potentially ensure that the fact that if for some reason things go wrong and for example there's basically a transaction that is being aired to destroy the value that is there, So it's basically provable that that contract did not work out, but you paid some premium to some other contract that said basically if this deal goes really wrong, you'll still get something back because you paid premium for the other contract. And so in a sense, sort of like derivative contract for a contract. So that's what I've been thinking about recently in terms of the future ones, but I think we're far away from that.
I think what you said, for a person who does not understand smart contracts, who's not into Bitcoin even, I think it sounds a little bit complicated. Can you maybe summarize that a person from the present would understand that amazing use case from the future that you are going to provide them? I mean, what a...
Right. Well, I'll
say a couple of sentences maybe.
I'll try to provide an analogy, I guess. So imagine you would use an escrow, a traditional third-party escrow these days to accomplish a certain operation, but for some reason, for example, it has been ruled out that that you're not getting your money back. That was the decision. But if there was somebody who willed to underwrite that kind of risk and say, well, if that deal does not work out, and you're not getting your money back, just because you paid premium and there was some sort of risk assessment, you will get some payment back, from the insurer. So that's as close as it probably can get, in relation to the existing environment that we have. It's just the same thing, but done in automated fashion, where the fact of that other deal going wrong can be checked independently, and the funds can be withdrawn automatically from that.
Okay. Okay, Stefan, how about you? And I'm talking to Stefan Thomas, of course.
Sure. There's actually a question in the chat that I'd like to address, which is he's kind of questioning Yuri's point about insurance companies, and we looked at insurance companies as well. I think they are viable. And to answer the question from the chat, the reason you don't want to use escrow, or the reason you don't want to use security deposits all the time, is because it's very expensive. If you have to insure you have to cover every contract, every possible payout by putting up money, that's very expensive. It adds up very quickly. Insurance is a way where you're using liability, you're using your reputation as a way to very cheaply provide that coverage. Did you have another question for me, Roman?
I actually have another question for Pamela, because with all those new use cases that people describe, I get the impression that the judicial system would not be able to absorb very quickly all those new use cases and all those new smart contracts that would emerge, and that inevitably, in my view, would create a lot of confusion and problems for people. So how would you address that problem? What would you say would happen as soon as something new? I mean, look at how difficult it is right now for different judicial systems to absorb Bitcoin, right? I mean, they're struggling with it. So what's going to happen with smart contracts? What's your take on it?
Well, first, I think that we should remember that all of these use cases are paralleling something that's currently happening in the real world. And so courts will look to the decisions that they've made in the past and analogize and say, well, if this was applicable in the real world, how can we apply these principles to smart contracts? So I don't think that, depending, of course, on the situation, I don't think that courts will be befuddled or dumbfounded whether or not they select law to guide them that is consistent with what the parties would want. That's a completely different story. As far as current use cases or future use cases go, I'm really excited to see an interaction between existing contracts and where we can integrate smart contract clauses, for example, where we might have some sort of interaction. So if you were to hire someone to build a home for you, you wouldn't put up all of the money up front. You wouldn't pay them all the money up front. You also wouldn't wait until the home was completely constructed before you pay them. You would pay them in different time, right? After they've completed the footings, after they've completed the shell, after they've done the drywall, whatever it is. These are called progress payments. And so I can envision the interaction between smart contracts that allow payment and allow proof of approval of certain states and conditions in the real world. And then the parties, instead of saying, yes, I'm going to send you a check, they can interact with the smart contract, which then, once they interact with it, allows the execution of a number of different self-executing clauses. The future is I'm working with another attorney now to try to implement a smart contract as a will. And the idea of this is to avoid probate. So in a perfect world, if all of your assets were smart assets, you could, in theory, create a series of transactions, or you could use Ethereum language and craft some sort of smart contract that would execute at a future date and allow the transfer of assets, bypassing the traditional probate court, bypassing greedy relatives that you didn't know you had, bypassing your wishes, which is essentially a lot of times what the probate court does. This is very interesting to a lot of my clients because, at least in the US, we have the idea that we earned it, we get to decide where it goes. And so we don't want people meddling with whatever our decision is for where our assets end up after we pass. And so this is a really, really powerful use case, and I use it to explain to clients who aren't really into Bitcoin yet or don't really understand the idea of smart contracts that, hey, this is a tool that can help you avoid these outcomes that traditional court processes can't really help you avoid. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think so. I actually have another one for Adam in my mind. It's not related directly to smart contracts, but rather to Counterparty. But I think when somebody issues an asset on the Counterparty, essentially what happens is, or for that matter on Ethereum, what happens is you go into the contract with all these shareholders that buy your shares, and that inevitably leads you to be subject for some governmental regulation. So how would you tackle that kind of problem? Because I can see it would prevent a lot of people from actually issuing assets on the blockchain. They would look at it, hey, that's a cool idea. Oh no, I'm going to be subject to a lot of regulations and a lot of judicial attention. I don't want that.
Right. So I mean, at face value, it's first of all a jurisdictional issue, and all we are really concerned about at this stage is writing the code and making it possible, and then allowing the legal aspect to sort itself out as it must. On the other hand, there are many ways of using Counterparty to, say, create an asset and take money and pay out, say, dividends, and some of them are might fall under might be categorized as involving securities, as would be classified as such by the United States government. Others would not. Others are coupons. Others are airline miles. Others are all sorts of things, IOUs, a la Ripple, and each one of those is a very different legal classification, as far as I can tell. And there are many ways that there are many valid ways of using Counterparty that don't step on any particular legal landmines, and it very much depends on the particular use case. The platform is intentionally significantly more powerful than it would be if it could only be if it would fall under one particular classification, legally.
I'm sorry, I accidentally turned off the video. So I actually have the same kind of question for Stefan Tual about Ethereum and about the legal implications of that. Can you answer that?
Yeah, same answer as Adam, really. It's a matter of jurisdiction. It's really about, in my view, this is regulation getting in the way of innovation. There was a fantastic article by Michael Jackson, the guy from Skype, not the singer, of course, who was talking about how if Skype hadn't been a little bit brash in terms of how, in the early days, they created this network, and if they hadn't sort of, well, taken some risk in terms of how they would create this decentralized, at the time, Skype was decentralized, new phone system, which obviously was, in fact, and still is to a certain extent, heavily regulated in the United States, then Skype wouldn't have seen the light of day. We're seeing this every day. You don't need to even get into Bitcoin to see these things. You see it with Uber. In the United States, again, facing lobbies of taxi driver pissed off because obviously, well, they'll make less money because now saving is transferred to the users. In terms of this technology, I think the users will win. Ultimately, the users of this technology, because at the very least, there'll be an elimination or maybe a reduction in terms of the amount of middlemen out there. And of course they're pissed off, and of course they're using regulation to protect themselves. But to answer your question directly, it's a matter of jurisdiction. If a technology like Ethereum, just like, say, for example, Java, can allow you to create a video game, like Candy Crush. It can allow you to create maybe a business application, maybe a CRM system of some denomination. But it can also be used for doing things that are illegal. Well, then don't.
I feel like I saw Pamela smiling while you were talking about how we're going to crush regulations and all that, and she probably agrees with you, but
I didn't say we're going to crush. She has a lot of
experience in the field.
No, I did not say we're going to crush regulation. We're not. This is not. Again, we're building, just like Adam said, he's building his software, we're building ours. What I'm thinking, however, is that there's this concept of the new normal. So the wheel example, I'm not sure who mentioned the wheel example, but I think it's a very good one. Most of my assets are in crypto. This is important to me today. This is useful. This isn't, crazy science fiction talk. I have children, matter of fact. Should something happen to me, I want to make sure those funds are secured and transferred to them. So yeah, it's useful today.
So Yurii, it seems like Trustatom is built unlike Counterparty. Counterparty is actually built on the Bitcoin. Unlike Ethereum, it's built on the Bitcoin blockchain. So it seems like it may be subject to any kind of litigations less than Ethereum. What do you think about it? What is your take on regulations and courts and the current legal system? How are you going to deal with that?
So do you mean in general, or with regards to the way Trustatom is built?
Well, I guess the more specifics, the better.
I guess. So basically, I think the only real thing that I know right now is that we don't know much about this yet, as there's not a lot of precedents, involving this kind of activities. So it's hard to really tell what's gonna work and how exactly it will pan out. Really hard to tell that. I think like the Skype example was really great in terms of that it's the new normal, as long as, I guess, as long as you're trying to find the sort of the right regulation in the right place, we will see just a change in perception of what it is and how these things will work. And in terms of contracts themselves, I don't think those smart contracts will be, like Pamela basically said, they're not going to be outside of the scope anyway, and the fact that they're stored, either in Ethereum or say in Trustatom's database or anywhere else, it doesn't really matter where they are. I guess we'll just have to run into the one of those situations and see what will happen.
Team, what do you think about what's going to happen in the future with the existing regulatory and judicial system interacting with smart contracts?
Yeah, so anyone listening to this wanting to get involved with smart contracts, hire a lawyer. That's my immediate advice. So what I'm going to do is real quick, by the way, I posted a comment in the group chat, but it's not the real group chat, so if you want to copy-paste that into the other real chat, let me know. So what I'm going to do is I'll preface that I don't necessarily agree with policies that exist and so on. I don't necessarily personally like the status quo, but there's no reason to be a martyr for some crusade by guys led in IRC in their little caves and stuff like that. So I'm not. This is not towards anyone here in this particular chat, but you see this a lot where they're like, "Oh, we're gonna destroy the Fed or destroy the state," and the reality is that's probably not going to happen. Not because for lack of trying, but this is not how it works. How reality works. So, in cases, for example, right now are like DPR. Shavers with the SEC, Shrem now with the federal government, Carpelis went bankrupt. So, I mean, what's ended up happening is in 2009, we started it as a system that, or at least with Bitcoin, for example, you started with a system that obviated the need of having trusted third parties, but as users started adopting it, you ended up having scams and stolen coins, people losing coins. So you ended up having kind of like an organic growth of people wanting to have insurance, or some way to mediate these transactions, or some way to make things more efficient. And I think that will probably happen, since we're guessing, this is a speculation, I think that will probably kind of happen with smart contracts too. This is not to say that smart contracts will fail or anything like that. I'm just saying that there'll probably just be a few niche cases initially, especially since we really don't have much today, aside from, I guess, if you want to call Bitcoin a smart contract. But yeah, what's ironically happened is we've created an entire. In order to get rid of the middlemen, you have to reintroduce middlemen. It looks like. I'm not saying that will always be the case, but in empirical, counterfactual, it looks like that's where things are heading. And again, obviously, not everyone will agree with me on that, and they'll call me a shill and so on. So that's the way I see things kind of heading. I have a whole chapter in a book, chapter 17. It goes through, I interviewed 4 or 5 lawyers, including Pamela, of different reasons why this could take place. For example, accredited investor, for those who are unfamiliar, just look up accredited investor. If you're in the US, in order to buy certain securities that are public, you need to have gone through a certain procedure to be considered a sophisticated investor. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why people do crowd sales outside the US, Ethereum, because you don't want to have to interact with the current legal system in the US. The reason I mention that is because you end up opening up yourselves to lawsuit, because chains like Swarm not necessarily can indemnify users. That's a legal terminology for being able to protect your users from lawsuits from third parties. They just don't have the money, the revenue to support that kind of legal defense. So, and then unlicensed practice of law is another issue. If you end up putting contracts on a network, one of the issues could be, at least in the U.S., are bar associations. Bar associations want to protect a monopoly, so they go after people who practice law without a license. And so I'm not saying it will happen, but it could happen. And so my point with all this is users, anyone listening to this, should definitely do your due diligence, do your education. If you plan to get involved in this space, either as an investor or developer or so on, definitely at least talk to a lawyer that has some inkling of an idea. The ones I recommend, in addition to Pamela here, Ryan Strauss, he's a Seattle-based attorney with Rydell Williams, Austin Brister, and James Duchenne. There was a program called Satoshi Legal. And then Preston Byrne, who's out in London, he's with Norton Rose and Fulbright. So that's my statement.
So it seems to me that people really want to get in smart contracts and want to do something like that precisely because they don't want to deal with the state. And I mean, that's probably one of the major reasons they don't want to deal with all the overload of and wasting money and all that. And I know probably Pamela wouldn't agree with that, and because she sees a lot of use cases. But I wonder what Stefan Thomas thinks about it. Do you really think that's the case? That's why people want smart contracts?
So one thing where I would definitely want to echo some of the things that Tim said is that one thing I keep noticing after 4 years in the space is that we Bitcoiners, we can be a little bit naive, we can be a little bit far from reality. I mean, if you look at the panelists down at the bottom, our average age is probably under 40, I would guess. So, you know, and that's something you find a lot at, you know, Bitcoin conferences and so on. So one thing I would definitely say is the #1 lesson that we need to get into our heads is that the existing system, as broken as it is, has evolved for a reason and has evolved over a long time, and so we need to figure out what pieces can still work in this new world and what pieces are actually a good idea to maintain. And so if you wanted to have something realistic, one thing we need to think about is scalability. Trying to talk about Bitcoin right now, we're pretty much reaching the limit of what the current block size supports. Raising the block size has all sorts of issues associated with it in terms of every node still needs to process every block, so we eventually lose the ability to run Bitcoin on very small computers. So these kinds of things we need to consider, and I think one thing that we're trying to do with Codius is we're trying to look for a very different solution in terms of running contracts completely off-chain. You can pick hosts any way you like, and you can interact with the existing systems, because again, that's where a lot of the value is currently, right? So we're trying to bridge kind of the existing system with the new stuff that's coming out, and I think that's a pretty important thing to remember.
Oleg, do you think we were naive?
Yeah, sure, we're all naive. But I actually agree with Stefan that we should really understand how the existing system evolved and why, and for a long time. Because once we actually understand it, then we will understand what the crypto anarchy is meant to those people who were involved, and how Bitcoin is exact implementation of what they said. So you probably were familiar with the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto from 1994 or 3, I don't remember exactly, which was saying that...
I don't think a lot of people are familiar with that, so you gotta elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, a little background. So Crypto Anarchists, they said that, wow, we have now personal computers, we have advanced networking, and we have public key cryptography. So now we can communicate on the internet absolutely privately, freely, and if we find some magical way to enforce some kind of obligations on this network, then we can eliminate completely the need for violent intervention, right? So if two persons cannot resolve the conflict, they cannot each other to each itself, or they cannot hire any third party to enforce some behavior. So they just have to follow the contract that they established up front, or just stay with nothing if they were stupid to not put it in some proper framework. And that's the whole point. And they were also always pondering how do we do those contracts? How do we deal with money? And this topic about the decentralized currency, decentralized money, was the central piece of this entire community of cypherpunks and crypto-anarchists. And finally, Bitcoin implements exactly that. It gives the digital decentralized currency, and it gives the ability to create contracts without third parties. So if you kind of cypherpunk, you could be completely anonymous, transact with some other anonymous party, and enforce the rules of the contract right there on the blockchain. So this is exactly what they talked about. So now back to what Stefan said about understanding how the existing system works and why it works, and what we can learn from it. So the point of view of crypto-anarchists is that the system evolved only because of the specific balance of power. And the balance of power is symmetrical. So whether you have a property, you must have more power to save it and protect it than anyone who wants to get it. And this was always the same story for the entire history of the civilization. The guys with the bigger guns or with the bigger force, they take the stuff from the smaller guys. And now we have a little bit different situation. First of all, the state exists within the framework of the global, very complicated economy. So we cannot have, we cannot be rude. Like the whole system of the enforcement acts on top of the very complicated economy. So the network, the electricity, all this good stuff should exist and must exist, first of all. And people will never tolerate any kind of disruption in this area. So we're kind of already agreeing to tolerate some inefficiency or whatever state is doing on top of the existing framework of the networking and communications. This is the first part. The second part, now we have Bitcoin, which is the first time in the entire civilization where you have property that has asymmetrical security. It's much cheaper and much easier to secure it than to take it. This is for the first time in the entire civilization. And this completely changes the balance of power. Now everyone who possesses Bitcoin, whether you're a poor person or you're a millionaire or billionaire, it doesn't matter. For all of them, it's equally cheap to protect their wealth and extremely complicated for anyone to take it. So this brings us to some new kind of configuration when we say, okay, we will never have a violent force that will act to destroy the entire foundation of the civilization, like network and electricity, the grid. And at the same time, we have this wonderful ledger and property that cannot be taken with force. From these two ideas, we can understand how Bitcoin can naively disrupt the Fed, disrupt the wars, disrupt all those kind of bad things that we don't like. And smart contracts, in the view of crypto-anarchists, is not some kind of thing in itself. It's just one logical step toward more peaceful society where this violent interaction is as contained as possible. So right now we are facing some huge states like Russia, America, whatever, that have huge powers to do a lot of damage to the world. And the point of those smart contracts is just to contain this damage. And the point of Bitcoin is to defund these people who create damage, so all the violence could be smaller and more local and more contained to the parties interacting.
So it seems to me from what you're saying, if smart contracts are the same thing for law as Bitcoin was for money. And I wonder what Pamela thinks about it, because it's also self-evident that if we have, for example, smart contracts, if we have those contracts and state doesn't know how to interact with them, it inevitably creates so-called multi-centered, poly-centered legal system in which you don't have a central authority who issues laws and tells you how things should be run, but rather creates different centers possibly, and maybe even no center at all when two people just arrange something and agree on the conditions in that contract, and then decide who's going to mitigate a conflict if something bad happens. So what do you think? Do you think that's a viable alternative to the current system, this sort of polylegal system?
Are you asking me?
I'm sorry?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay. So ideally, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. Ideally, I think that one of the things that we really need to consider in smart contracts is, again, trying to avoid the standard dispute resolution mechanisms and trying to avoid state intervention. One of the things that Tim brought up is the idea of startups and innovators in the space and how they need to consider the ramifications of what it is that they want to do and really be able to evaluate the risk, because most of this conversation, at least in my mind, has focused on kind of civil dispute, civil contracts. But the reality is that there are a number of governments who would consider some of these actions criminal. And smart contracts cannot decriminalize those actions. And so people are, unfortunately, may end up having to answer for those to governments. And so when we're looking at smart contracts and looking at the decentralization of law as a whole, we have to remember that governments consider themselves sovereign, and they will take powers that maybe aren't included in a contract. That said, I think that there's certainly room for the development of a kind of crowd-based alternative dispute resolution mechanism. One of the projects that I'm most interested in is creating a global kind of jury pool where people opt in to this jury system, and they say, okay, instead of having going through the traditional dispute resolution mechanism, we want to use this arbitration. But our arbitration is made up of volunteers from around the world, say 1,000 people who have knowledge in smart contracts in your particular niche area. And you can limit the amount of time that it takes to resolve this dispute, say 2 weeks. And you can present evidence to these participants and these potential jurors, and then they actually have to give reasoning for why they've decided for one party or the other. And I think that's a really important point for two reasons. One, to inform the parties, but also to allow a precedent or an understanding of how we want to interact to grow and develop, so that we can actually create a robust alternative dispute resolution mechanism that would be compliant with our international arbitration treaties, so that courts around the world who've signed the treaty, right now I believe it's 149, would be forced by treaty to recognize these arbitration decisions. And so I think that those are the most important points that we really need to consider, and I'm interested to hear what the other panelists think about those ideas.
All right, thank you. I actually got, I don't think we have a lot of time left, maybe 15, 20 minutes. So I had another question in my mind, and it concerns usability of those solutions that people are working on. And I can believe that people need smart contracts and they want to use that. But sometimes, even though I myself a developer, it all sounds sometimes complicated, and it not only sounds, it just looks this way. So what do you think would be the way to make it all those solutions user-friendly? How do we make the whole experience pleasant to people? Because it seems to me it's very, very important right now. People are so tired and exhausted by having to deal with the existing legal system of lawyers that it's just obvious that any solution that would add and not lessen the burden, it would just not be acceptable. So I wonder what developers of actual products think about it. So maybe we start with Adam first. Let me actually enable you, Adam, because I just need people. That's my weakness. I just go ahead and mute people. Here we go. Yeah, I think now we should be able to speak, hopefully. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see smart contract again. The term smart contracts is misleading. Smart contracts are not contracts the way that legal contracts are. They're not enforced in at all the same way. There's a qualitative difference between a contract, which there's air quotes, that is self-executing versus one that is legally binding. And smart contracts I don't see any reason why they would be legally binding in any jurisdiction. You don't sign smart contracts. You sign them with your private, with a public key, and that's totally different. Even the word signing there is misleading. So I don't see them as an alternative to the legal system in any way in the near future. I do see them as it really is a way of looking at code. That's what smart contracts are. It's a way of formatting code. I mean, you can. There's even a programming paradigm based on contracts, right? Where different code executes different things, and you know what it's going to do. And that's all it really is. It's a very powerful paradigm, just as say object-oriented programming is, and it's the way forward. As is shown with Bitcoin and Counterparty and Ethereum.
So I get it. I mean, it's integrated into the, okay, you seem to be in favor of integrating it into the existing system, and that's fine. But my question was, if you integrate it into the existing system, then people still need some incentive to use that. It's going to be easy for them to use it. The interface is going to be good. So how do you see, user friendliness developing in the coming years in terms of smart contracts? Because the people want to use them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, smart contracts aren't going to look like smart contracts. They're not going to look like traditional. They're not going to look like contracts. Rather, they're not going to, and they're not going to look like buying something on eBay either. A smart contract will look like a multi-signature transaction in Bitcoin, but more complicated. At least possibly more complicated. It'll require a whole new user experience, a whole new workflow, and I mean, like you can log into Counterwallet today and engage in smart contracts. And you know, there's a whole vocabulary that needs to be developed around the functionality, and there needs to be education and understanding around it. But I mean, yeah, it's going to work by way of analogy with regular contracts or with regular financial instruments, right? So, you know, we'll call a dividending counterparty a dividend because it's most similar to a dividend in the real world. Even though it really is a fundamentally different kind of thing. It's not it's not legal. It's smart, and so and the interface is going to be different because of it, right? You know, the interface for Counterwallet is rather somewhat different from the interface to Ameritrade, for instance. But a lot of the technology will be the same. And yeah, you can start to see how it works with, you know, Counterwallet today, for instance.
So I saw Oleg smiling so wide, it looks like he wants to violently disagree with what Adam just said. So go ahead.
Well, not quite disagree, but the Adam started like really well about when saying that smart contracts will not look like something that we got used to. But the answer, like, well, it will be multi-sig, is not actually an answer to the user experience question, because the whole point is to hide this thing from the user, and the question is how it will look to the user after all this hiding, how it can possibly work. So the one not very smart way to solve it is just to put some central party, like some website that just deals with all this stuff, and you just give them their money and they're like a bank. This is not a very smart way, because now they control your money and they execute those smart contracts that are not very smart after all. So the smart way is actually to still be your own bank, that you still can have full control over your property, over the private keys, whatever, and then you still can participate in the contracts. And my vision is that those contracts will be almost invisible. You know this old advertisement for an iPhone, there is an app for that. So there won't be even an app for the smart contract, there will be just apps. So I will give you this example. Imagine the Uber that struggles right now with regulations with the taxi mafia, etc. Imagine you do the peer-to-peer Uber, where you have just the drivers and you have the users, but you don't have any organization that hires the drivers and pays them and collects money from the user. So you just have this peer-to-peer network where people just find the drivers and somehow have this decentralized way to figure out their reputation, etc. And they need to enter the contract, right? So that they put some money in, the driver comes in, then they ride safely to the destination point, and then unlock the money. And this involves the smart contract, but there will be an app, and people will never see this stuff. They will just tap the button, put in their destination, get the driver, rate him after ending the trip, and unlock him, and the money with just a single tap. So there won't be anything saying smart contract. The whole thing will just work. And the whole idea of smart contract is just to make it secure and safe. The drivers actually arrive, actually deliver you to a point that you need to, and make you actually to unlock the money. So all the incentives should be in place, and there should be no button saying, okay, now let's start this fancy contract thing, or let's go to a lawyer, or let's go to sign something somewhere. So it's just an app. Now, the most funny part is that, wait a sec, I had a note for this somewhere. Yeah, that it's completely automated, completely hidden, and there is no even question about legal issues or something, because you completely escape any possibility to have a problem in the first place. Right? So it's all taken care of you. The whole point of smart contract is just to automate this stuff, so you don't need to put a signature, put your passport scan, etc. You just tap a button, put the money in, and you're done. And the major missing component that is missing, and Stefan actually mentioned it like an hour earlier, we need the universal way for people to participate with their own funds in those kind of applications. And this is why we were developing a specification for Bitcoin Wallet API, which I will post in the chat, so this is the spec. The idea is to develop a protocol to safely get the user's money to be plugged into arbitrary Bitcoin transaction. That is very simple to use for the user, so he doesn't need to know what kind of special stuff is going on in this smart contract. It doesn't need to educate the wallet itself, so any wallet can support it, and has very little overhead in all the directions. and the users could just open the Uber app. It will say, okay, now we need some money from your wallet. The iPhone will switch to a wallet which will say, okay, do you want to lock in like $20 for Uber app for I don't know what reason? And the user says, yes, okay. And then it's done. And then the app just decides how to unlock and return this money because the user already trusted those $20 to the app. So that's it. We have the smart contract somewhere inside, and the whole process just works. It's safe for the user. All the money is in the user's pocket. There's no bank, no legal system, nothing to sign, no identity problem. Very smooth. You just tap, 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 and you're done. That's the goal.
Okay, Yurii, do you think there's going to be an app for that? Do you think, because your solution seems to be web-based, what's going to happen?
That's the same thing.
Do you think we're going to have to hide from the legal system while using something like Trustatom, for example?
Well, first of all, well, the way I understand Oleg is it's not just an app that, you know, sort of in a phone app kind of sense, but just in general kind of sense where app could be anything, a desktop application, a web application, a phone application. I think, generally speaking, Oleg is really right about one thing, that smart contracts ideally should not look like anything. They should be just embedded in whatever produces them. So that your experience is not about smart contracts per se, but what you're trying to achieve with them. So that's a really great point. And obviously for that we do need that integration with, say, Bitcoin Vault APIs or whatever will be used by the participants of those contracts. So it's probably going to be both. So in certain cases where you're working with a very specific use case, that will be an app that just embeds this contract inside, and you might not even know it's there. And in other cases where you need a more generic kind of agreement of some sort, you would probably resort to something that allows you to have that sort of flexibility at the cost of a more complicated user experience. Does that answer your question?
Well, let's ask Stefan Tual. Does that answer the question? Do you have a different answer for that? Is there going to be an app? Ethereum is an app.
Absolutely, so that's what we're trying to do. Bottom line is, I think it's a bit like TCP/IP today. You go on Facebook, you want to watch picture of funny cats, you don't care if it's TCP/IP or mumbo-jumbo technical something. It's irrelevant to you. What you want is you want usability out of this app, you want value. So what it would look like, an app market, maybe some, we know already that it's possible to leverage the Bitcoin network today to interact with Bitcoin, so that's what those gambling sites are doing. Now Ethereum takes it one step further, whereby the GUIs themselves are decentralized, so they're distributed on a BitTorrent-like network, so they can't be taken down, they can't be attacked, and so on and so forth. But yes, people won't even know they're using these technologies like Ethereum, like Counterparty. They'll just use them.
I have to say something. Okay, guys, look. I understand that sounds cool in theory, and it's great to have everything in the background. But the reason you have to see these shrink-wrapped ULAs and TOSs is because people were hiding stuff inside those agreements. So if you hide what's actually taking place in the contract, you end up making somebody liable for something they might not actually agree to. So I'm not sure. I think that's completely debatable at this point. I mean, if we're trying to be transparent, then you're going to have to be transparent with the terms of agreement. I should point out, by the way, I know we're almost done, check out mintchalk.com. It's run by a guy named James and Aaron out in Palo Alto. They're doing contracting, build it. Actus is a program from the Stevens Institute. They're trying to come up with codified language for contracts. Marcus Miller, he's got a program, or he's over at Google. He does something with e-rights. I mention all this because, look, we already have a form of kind of polycentric law, if you will, in terms of internationally, with 200 different jurisdictions vying for basically jurisdiction arbitrage. Like Ireland and Netherlands have this tax agreement that Facebook, Google, Pfizer, they take advantage of. It's this double Dutch Irish sandwich or something like that. And in fact, my own corporation's incorporated in Delaware because of the legal arbitrage stuff. Although obviously smart contracts might add some new wrinkles to that, but people who are listening to this don't expect to be living in some gulch, tomorrow or something like that. For example, when you have something that's stolen, there's something called Coin Prism, which is a colored coin project. They can issue dividends on a stock. the problem, or the cool thing with that is, hey, yeah, you get to decentralize it. The double-edged side of that is, if that gets stolen, people steal stuff like bitcoins and so forth. What happens to the performance of that dividend? If the company continues paying that dividend, knowing that the person had been stolen from, like if somebody stole from me and I tell the company, hey, it was stolen, and they continue paying, then I can sue them for continuing to pay a thief, basically. If they stop paying, then it defeats the purpose of decentralization, because anonymity is given up, identity is taken place. So obviously this moves into another area called Memo dots. That's another legal term talking about what can be returned to the rightful owner. That's where the term bona fide comes from. Anyways, I wanted to get that out there. Again, be wary of disappearing ULAs, EULAs. Those have a purpose because people were being sued for hiding stuff in there. So.
One other point I'd like to make is that just because what a contract is at its essence is an offer, an acceptance, and an exchange of value. It does not have to be in writing. It does not have to be signed. So what we're talking about today, all of these interfaces are considered legal contracts, and they will be interpreted by a judge if these issues are brought before them, and they will be interpreted in light of contract language. So simply because we label it as a smart contract doesn't mean that it changes the nature or the essence of the agreement. And an agreement between two people for an exchange of value is a contract.
I was just looking at the Q&A section, and obviously I wouldn't be able to, I don't have the time to ask all the questions that were written there, but one question in particular I think is kind of an interesting, maybe Stefan Thomas can answer that question. In the context of smart contracts, what happens to people who lose their private keys? And what happens to victims of private key theft? Is there any way to revoke or replace smart contract keys? What do you think? Can you answer that?
I wonder why you picked me. Is it because I lost 7,000 bitcoins or something? So my take on that is we've talked a lot about, or a little bit about, reputation systems. There's one very interesting project called Identify, spelled identi.fi, by Sirius, the guy who registered Bitcoin.org and set up the Bitcoin forums originally. And he has a very interesting concept. He's not using a blockchain to represent identity. He's using associations that are attested to by third parties. So, for example, some party might say, I believe that this Bitcoin address corresponds to this email address, and you will consider those associations based on how much trust you have in that third party. So, what does that have to do with losing your keys? Well, I think that the way that you ultimately regain control over an asset in the real world is by proving your identity, right? Like, let's say you lose your bank card, you lose your passport. Eventually, you'll go through some process where you'll gain each of these credentials back by proving that you are actually who you say you are. Maybe your family will vouch for you, or your employer might vouch that, yeah, this is actually this person. So eventually you'll regain your credentials that are used as a proxy for using your asset. So that can be encapsulated in a smart contract. So you could have a smart contract which knows, well, these assets are owned by the person who has this social security number, who has this name, this address, this phone number, this email address, and if you can recreate some majority of these credentials, eventually the smart contract will say, okay, here's a new key for you that allows you access to these assets. So I think that you kind of, again, you just have to emulate what the current system does in a decentralized way, and that solves the problem.
I have a short one, another one for you, for Stefan Tual and Yurii Rashkovskii from the Q&A section. When will Codius, Ethereum, and Trustatom be production ready?
For us, it's going to be very likely February 2015, and if you're interested in that stuff, our code is already open sourced and available for trying it out on the testnet. The contracts are working. The dApps are not distributed able yet, but you can build them and you can interact with the underlying blockchain.
Stefan, what
so for us, we're currently working on the production sandbox, which is so the last really complex component that needs to go into Codius. After that, we're going to be mostly focused on building documentation and developer tools. So I think, depending on how much time you spend, you might want to get involved earlier or later. But I would say watch out for Codius over the next couple of months. So yeah.
Yurii, what about Trustatom?
Basically, it's soft-launched, but it's quite different than comparing to Ethereum or Codius, as it's not a platform for building contracts. It's basically, you know, a sort of end-user application that contains very specific contracts. So it's been soft-launched, but there's not a lot of contracts just yet. There's going to be more over the course of this fall.
Okay, so I think we're almost out of time, but I have a final question for each and every one of you, and probably, you know, take 2 or 3 minutes again to answer that question. What do you think is going to be, you know, the future of smart contracts? And very briefly, I know we talked already a lot about this, but just to summarize what every one of you thinks on that subject. And let's start directly with Adam, then Oleg and Pamela, and so on. So Adam, go ahead. Adam, we cannot hear you currently. Let me, I think I, again, muted you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you repeat the question? It's just what's the future of smart contracts?
Yeah, just briefly in 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know what's left to be said. This is very bright. It will. It's a paradigm for code and in which when smart contracts are coupled with distributed consensus, such as Bitcoin and blockchain-based technologies provide, you have a recipe for really revolutionizing a lot of industries, and yeah, really anything involving the transfer of value, of which money is a representation, and trying to say what particular applications we're going to have is very hard, because you know it's the cliche of, you know, it's what you create. In the near future, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more user-friendly interfaces to existing technologies that implement smart contracts. You're not going to have arbitrarily complex smart contracts from the get-go. I mean, Bitcoin has had multi-sig support for a while now, for example, and people still very rarely use it. We're just starting to get to the place where, what was it? I forget the site that was recently launched. Was it by Coinbase, perhaps, that adds support for multi-sig in a user-friendly wallet. And Counterparty just added support for multi-sig to its Bitcoin 2.0 platform. We're just starting to get to the stage where people are going to really discover the power of even the simplest kinds of smart contracts. And the road from there is going to be incremental and evolutionary. The revolution happened. It's with Bitcoin because of the distributed consensus element. And then what's next is a lot of discovery on the part of users and developers as to how best to integrate it into life.
Thanks, Adam. Oleg?
Well, I think the future of smart contracts will be without the state, without the global violent enforcement structure, and with smart collateral, with the dumb collateral, with trusted third parties, without trusted third parties, and with the smart contracts, which are really smart algorithmic conditions on some kind of blockchain. And what I mean by this is that people will just normally try to ensure their relationships with some sort of collateral without or with third parties, depending on how they trust them. And in case something really goes wrong, they just risk within the amount of value they've been transferred. And I really doubt that it will make any sense to come up with some global violent enforcement structure voluntarily that will try to ultimately resolve any dispute. So how I see this is that people will strive to find out the proper incentives to solve the issues voluntarily. And if they really fail, in some hopefully very rare cases, then they just stick with it. They just will at worst what they could do, they just can go to each other and like hit their faces, but that's their own personal problem. I really doubt there will be like armies of sadists who will be available for hire and go and threaten someone to actually enforce the contractual terms. So all this legal status will become mostly irrelevant. When 99% of interactions can be insured against anything, and when people put in proper financial incentives to behave nicely, and when Bitcoin actually allows people to have savings and be prosperous and be like future forward-looking guys, not always like struggling from salary day to salary day, we will have like more peaceful interactions. People will be more willing to solve the problems to mutual satisfaction, etc. They just need some little bit of financial incentives. And I believe there will be place for centralized, trusted third parties that are just trusted. Like, I trust Coca-Cola when I buy a can of Coke because they have a brand, they have some investment into their brand, so I don't really worry. And if the Coke got not really good, then, well, I spent my money for nothing, but, I mean, it's fine. I will not go to try to sue them. And if they really, like, fuck something up, then they will lose a bunch of money themselves and go out of business. That's the only way out. So that's it.
Pamela?
Sorry, what?
Yeah, I was going to give the word to Pamela.
Yeah, sure.
So I think one of the most exciting things about smart contracts are discussions like these, and I think that this gives us an opportunity to reimagine and evaluate and reimagine the legal system. At its core, the legal system was designed to bring fairness and justice to people, and we could debate on whether or not it's efficient and effective at doing that, but I don't think that anyone would disagree that it's time to look at the system, look at what works, look at what doesn't work, and see to the extent that it creates dialogue like this. I think that that's a benefit to our society in general. I think that we're going to be moving, as we move towards smart contracts, we're going to see lawyers and the legal process have to change. And I think that's a positive thing. I think that parties, again, will be encouraged and incentivized to actually discuss issues prior to signing the contract, which will hopefully minimize disputes later. And we can look at, even within this discussion, the word contract has meant so many things to different people. And that's just one example of one word and how ambiguity can be held in one word. And so I think that, again, to circle around, discussions like these are very important. And I think the future is going to be a lot more of these discussions, a lot more transparency, and we're going to see lawyers and developers working together to actually make a difference and provide reasonable, efficient, effective solutions to contracts and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms.
Thank you. Stefan? Stefan? You're next. Stefan Thomas?
I thought it was Stefan Tual. On my screen it's a different order, sorry.
You and I think your name's pronounced differently, so go ahead.
Right. So yeah, my goal for smart contracts is simply that they become a tool for developers, for companies, for anyone who needs things to happen in a precisely predefined way. And I want it to be a tool that you don't have to think about. I think Stephen Tual mentioned this earlier about one of the key things that could come out of Ethereum, Codius, and other technologies like that is that it just becomes very easy to write smart contracts, and you don't have to map your use case onto this Bitcoin scripting language or some other very different way of thinking about it, but rather you just write the code as you would normally write it. And then smart contracts just becomes a way of running it in a way that it's never down. You don't have to worry about uptime or paying for a server or anything like that. It's just sort of a self-financed thing that just sort of exists, just like Bitcoin or BitTorrent or other peer-to-peer networks. So I think if we can make smart contracts a tool, and then obviously if you go further out than maybe 3 years or towards the end of the 3 years, if it can make the legal system more frictionless, if it can replace services like eBay, I think that'd be an extra win. But I think right now I just look at it as something that makes developers' life easier.
Thank you. Stefan, Tual?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's impossible to predict the future, but I think short term, this type of technology obviously allows you to have control over your funds that already exist. It's called Bitcoin. Secondly, I think we're going to see obviously the development of those dApps, and as Adam was saying, beautiful GUIs. People not even aware necessarily they're leveraging these technologies. They're only benefiting from what those technologies can offer, and that includes, you know, control over your personal data, your privacy, and things like that. And then finally, and again to echo something that Adam said, I think integration with the real world, in particular node incentivization, is going to be huge. So integrating with Wi-Fi router, for example, you know, to create decentralized mesh network, that's something I'm very, very interested in and working on, you know, obviously through Ethereum contracts and dApps on the testnet. I think that's critical.
All right, thank you. Team Swanson.
Yeah, so I think everybody, or all these projects are well-intentioned and have noble goals, but they're probably overhyped in the short run, just like the Segway was, which eventually leads to like some kind of burnout or overpromise and under-delivering. I'm not saying this will happen, I'm just saying that could happen. And I actually think the immediate future will be relatively mundane, such as wills and trusts, kind of like Pamela was talking about. One particular program is in Kenya. There's something called Wageni Tech, which is run by Robin Kelsey. And he's wanting to help farmers move, manage, and track produce to market to bypass middlemen. That doesn't seem like something really sexy. That doesn't seem like a singularity kind of thing that everyone likes to talk about. But that's kind of needed for maybe that particular area, and I think we might see more of that along with purchase chain, notary chains, some of these things that we already do with a lot of paperwork. Again, the blockchains and ledgers are distributed ledgers are pretty good at certain things, but not at everything, and it has real limitations that local adopters on like the subreddit of Bitcoin, they like to project their own philosophical things, and I think that really does a disservice to this technology long term. For example, I mean, Legos could be used to make a car, but you wouldn't want to go driving around it in a car, or a laptop could be used as a paperweight, but it's not particularly, you know, cost effective to do that. And so I think what we'll end up having is we're going to run into a tautology with smart contracts. They're going to be used by people who need to use them, just like Bitcoin is. And instead, it's so we're going to have a divergence between what can be said, the Superman version of Bitcoin and smart contracts versus the actual reality. So if, for example, people say, oh, it's going to end war. Well, you had War of the Spanish Succession. There was a battle of Denain, and I believe it is 250,000 people that fought that in 1712, and it was gold based. So like, in terms of, there wasn't like everyone saying, oh, the Bitcoin's going to destroy fiat or whatever. There's if the state exists the way it does today, there's always going to be these institutions and types of aggression. So I think that the smart contracts do add collateral and arbitration competition, and it does take away the problem in trust in the system itself, but the edges are the kryptonite and always will be. So we need to focus on education and creating solutions to real actual problems today with the actual technology, and not just some hypothetical, you know, type 2 civilization where we're using the sun for all of our energy.
I think it just crushed a lot of people's dreams about, you know, the dissolution of state and all that. Yurii, Rashkovskii, what's your take?
I actually subscribe to a lot of things that Tim just said, you know, and especially the end of it, you know, being about practicality. I personally think that the future of smart contracts, the way I see it right now, if it is to succeed in, you know, and be in that sort of shape or form that we sort of think about it, it's going to be about, again, trade and commerce in general. Just like Bitcoin makes moving money around easier and much, much cheaper, smart contracts that enable other commercial activity cheaper and faster and basically much more straightforward are basically to be the killer app and the driver for adoption of smart contracts. And you know, if that will be successful, and if we'll see more people in the mainstream using these kind of contracts for doing their business, well, engaging in particular business activities, then we can, you know, expect people to employ them much out further for you know, very different kind of situations. So just like with Bitcoin, it helped us to trade more efficiently. Now we can just take it one more step further and describe more complicated transactions and sort of reap the same kind of benefits as we do with Bitcoin.
Right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. That was, I do think it was a great discussion, and I do hope that most of you will go ahead and build that future, and also those watching us would get inspired and maybe come up with some awesome solution that would, you know, compete with you guys. But I think it'd be a healthy thing to have around. Thanks everyone, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.